1833, in the heart of the Vallée de Joux, a self-taught watchmaker named Antoine LeCoultre transformed his family's small barn into a watchmaking atelier. That building would give birth to the first watch manufacturer in the valley, a place where every craft gathered under one roof. Yet here is the paradox you have likely never considered. The name he built would eventually vanish from the dials it powered. The industry he helped create would swallow his own identity whole. You wear his movements every day without ever hearing his name. This is the story of a brand that lost itself to the very world it invented, and the quiet ghost who gave it life. Stay close, because the name on the case has been hiding a century of secrets. You know the name Jaeger-LeCoultre, of course. You have seen it engraved on the dial of a reverso, that legendary rectangular case that flips to protect its crystal. You have admired it under the glass of an auction house, the polished gold catching the light of a winter afternoon. But the visible world tells you only the brand. The invisible world holds the truth of who actually made it, and that truth began long before a hyphen ever joined two names. The Vallée de Joux in 1833 was not a place of prestige. It was a harsh, frozen valley where farmers spent their long winters bending metal into precision, where patience was the only currency that mattered. Antoine LeCoultre did not arrive with a fortune or a lineage of watchmakers behind him. He was self-taught, a man who learned by dismantling and rebuilding, by failing and starting again. His barn became a laboratory, and within that modest space, he gathered the scattered crafts of watchmaking under one roof. That single act changed everything. Before him, a watch passed through dozens of independent hands during its creation, each artisan working in isolation, each part traveling the valley to find its next craftsman. LeCoultre's vision was radical in its simplicity. Bring every skill into one house. In that decision, the manufacture was born, and with it, the very model that the Swiss industry would one day build its empire upon. Remember that word, manufacture. It will matter more than any logo you have ever seen on a dial, because it describes a revolution that most collectors never pause to understand. Before LeCoultre, watchmaking was an industry of fragments. After him, it became a cathedral of integrated craft. The company's own history declares that upon its founding, Jaeger-LeCoultre officially became the first watch manufacturer in the Vallée de Joux, with multiple watchmaking crafts brought together under one roof. That sentence, buried in a brand history page, is the hinge upon which the entire story swings. Because what LeCoultre created was not merely a workshop. It was the blueprint for an industry. But here is where the story turns strange. For more than a century, the LeCoultre atelier built movements, calibers, and complete watches for names that you absolutely know. Brands that wore the glory while the valley remained silent. The dials carried other names. The prestige flowed elsewhere. And in 1937, the unthinkable happened. The company officially renamed itself Jaeger-LeCoultre, a hyphenated compromise that erased the pure LeCoultre identity from the market, except in North America, where the older name lingered for decades. The creator had been absorbed by its own creation. The barn had built a forest, and the forest wrote a new name for the tree. That silence from the valley. The moment a creator is absorbed by his own creation is precisely the kind of story this channel exists to excavate. If you want to keep peeling back the dials and reading what the industry would rather you forgot, subscribe and walk with me through this archive. Tell me in the comments, before this video, had you ever heard the name LeCoultre standing alone, without Jaeger attached? Pause here and consider what that actually means. If you have ever caught yourself staring at a movement under a loop rather than checking the time, you already know the difference between owning a watch and reading one. The same instinct that draws your eye to the balance wheel, that hypnotic oscillation that beats without battery or wire, is the instinct that should make this story feel personal. because the watch on your wrist, if it carries a Jaeger-LeCoultre name, is carrying a legacy that almost forgot its own father. The dial is a mask. The movement is the face, and the face was shaped by a man whose name the industry quietly set aside. The irony deepens when you trace the meeting that produced the hyphen. In 1903, a Frenchman named Edmond Jaeger and a Swiss watchmaker named Jacques-David LeCoultre met, and the company itself describes that moment as a turning point that changed watchmaking forever. Together, they fused French style and Swiss technique, an approach still associated with the brand today. But read that carefully. The official story credits the collaboration. The myth debunked by the company's own history is that Edmond Jaeger alone created the brand. He did not. The collaboration was essential, yes, but the foundation, the manufacture, the revolutionary integrated atelier, all of that came from the LeCoultre side of the hyphen. 2 years before that famous meeting, imagine the state of the manufacture. The 19th century had been a relentless climb of invention. LeCoultre and his descendants had spent decades refining the calibers, miniaturizing the movements, perfecting the finishing that would eventually become the envy of the entire Swiss watch ecosystem. The atelier was not just a manufacturer, it was a supplier of hearts, a hidden engine that powered the wrist and pocket of the entire industry. And that is the unseen process that this visible dial conceals. When you buy a Jaeger-LeCoultre, you're not buying a name that began in 1937. You're buying a century of invisible mastery, a lineage that was active for 104 years before the hyphen ever appeared. So why the rename? Why would a company with such deep roots abandon its own heritage? The answer is both mundane and revealing. By the 20th century, the LeCoultre name, for all its technical glory, did not carry the same commercial force as the Jaeger name, particularly in the French market where Edmond Jaeger had built a reputation for chronometric precision. A French language history makes this explicit. The Jaeger-LeCoultre name was officially created in 1937, so the manufacturer's products could be marketed under a single brand. It was a business decision, a marketing unification, not a new beginning. The brand was not founded in that year. It was renamed, and the distinction is the entire point of this story. The visible changed. The invisible never did. You may own a watch whose beating heart was born in this valley, yet the dial bears another name entirely. That sentence should land with the weight of a revelation, because it applies to far more than Jaeger-LeCoultre. The manufacturer supplied movements to some of the most prestigious names in horology before the hyphen ever unified its own identity. Collectors who chase those other dials, who pay premium prices for those engraved signatures, are often carrying a LeCoultre heart without knowing it. And the knowledge changes how you see the piece on your wrist. It is not merely an object of status. It is a vessel of history, a document of a time when the maker stayed silent so that others could shine. You might be carrying that silence on your wrist right now, and you would never know it from the dial. Subscribe so we can keep walking through the workshops where those invisible histories were forged, one hand-finished bevel at a time. In the comments, simply write the name on the dial you are wearing. I want to see how many of us are carrying LeCoultre hearts under other signatures. The proof sits in the archives, in the ledgers, in the documented history that the company itself has preserved. Adventure began in 1833 when self-taught watchmaker Antoine LeCoultre set up his own workshop, a phrase recorded by the Federation of the Swiss watch industry. And upon its founding, the house officially became the first watch manufacturer in the Vallée de Joux. These are not legends handed down by marketers. They are verified anchors of a historical record, and they contradict the casual assumption that the brand is merely a 20th century merchant, a name stitched together by a businessman's handshake. The craft runs deeper, and the depth is what you should be paying for, even if the market only knows the surface. Consider the sensory reality of that first atelier. The air in the Vallée de Joux during the winter months hangs cold and still, carrying the scent of metal dust and oiled steel. The only sound is the delicate scrape of a file against a brass plate, the whisper of a lathe, the near-silent click of a balance wheel springing to life for the first time. That is the olfactory and auditory origin of everything you now admire under glass. The polished showcase, the velvet cushion, the halogen spotlight, all of that is the theater. The barn was the forge. And when you slide a modern Jaeger-LeCoultre over your wrist, you are closing a circuit that began with a self-taught man in a converted barn. A man whose name the industry almost erased. Here is what the catalog omits: the chronometer certificate, the polished case, the precisely engraved rotor. All of that belongs to the realm of the finished object. But the unseen process, the years of accumulated skill, the architectural assembly of a caliber with its Code de Genève, the guilloche on the dial, the hand-finished anglage that catches light at an angle only a loop reveals. That is the real luxury. It always has been. The misconception that Jaeger-LeCoultre is only a brand name, not a manufacturer, collapses the moment you read their own declaration of being the first manufacturer in the valley. They integrated multiple watchmaking crafts under one roof from the very beginning. The name changed. The integration never did. But the disappearance of the LeCoultre name is not a tragedy to be mourned. It is a pattern to be recognized, and recognizing it changes you. The collector who sees only the dial buys the wrong watch for the rest of his life. The collector who reads the movement buys one watch that lasts 2 centuries. The difference is not in the budget, it is in the vision. And once you have seen the scene, once you know that the hyphen hides a century of unseen labor, you cannot unsee it. Every dial becomes an invitation to look deeper. Every tick of the second hand becomes a reminder of the beating heart beneath. The invisible world is not hidden from you. It is merely waiting for you to look. Close your eyes for a moment and place yourself in the 21st century atelier, the direct descendant of that 1833 barn. The same cold walls, the same patient craftsman, the same obsessive attention to a margin measured in microns. The company still assembles movements entirely by hand, still finishes components that no eye will ever see unless the case back is opened, still honors the integration of craft that Antoine LeCoultre invented. The name on the dial may carry the Jaeger prefix, but the soul of the place remains stubbornly LeCoultre. The hyphen is not a merger of equals. It is a gatekeeper, a marker that the original name was subsumed but never extinguished. The battery is gone. The chip never existed. The heartbeat remains. Now, the deeper layer. Why should you, a discerning eye, care about a corporate renaming that happened in the last century? Because the pattern repeats everywhere in luxury, and once you see it, you will see it everywhere. The great houses are rarely founded under the names they now wear. They are consolidated, unified, repackaged. And the original creators, the visionaries who shaped the craft, are often relegated to footnotes. Jaeger-LeCoultre is the clearest example because the evidence is documented, the dates are verifiable, and the myth is actively debunked by the company itself. If they admit that the brand was not founded in 1937, if they trace their own origins to 1833, then the entire visible narrative weakens. And in that weakening, the true story emerges. The myth says Edmond Jaeger alone created the brand. The documentation says the brand's emergence is attributed to the collaboration between Edmond Jaeger and Jacques-David LeCoultre, not to Jaeger alone. That correction matters because it restores agency to the family that founded the manufacture. Jacques-David LeCoultre was not a junior partner. He was the heir to an industrial revolution, the descendant of a man who had transformed a barn into the blueprint for an entire industry. The collaboration was a meeting of equals. French elegance joined to Swiss precision, but the operational soul, the integrated atelier, the hard-won technical patents, all of that belonged to the LeCoultre lineage. The hyphen acknowledged the union. It did not change the source of the heartbeat. And then the North American exception, documented in the archival history, adds a final twist to the puzzle. In North America, the unified Jaeger-LeCoultre name was not universally applied. The older LeCoultre brand persisted on select pieces, a ghost that refused to fully vanish. Collectors in the United States could buy a watch bearing the older name years after the European market had moved to the hyphenated form. So the erasure was never complete. It was a marketing drift, a commercial alignment, but the memory of the original name remained alive in certain markets. A quiet testament that identity, once forged, is difficult to fully dissolve. The barn had built an industry. The industry had taken the name, but the barn still whispered through the dials. That whisper from the barn is the reason these stories remain hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone who looks beyond the dial. Subscribe so you do not drift away before the next invisible history is uncovered, because every watch holds a manuscript most collectors never read. Write the word LeCoultre in the comments if you will now question every founding date you encounter. Or tell me which other ghost you suspect still haunts the watch world. This knowledge transforms not only how you read Jaeger-LeCoultre, but how you approach every watch you will ever encounter. When a date appears on a display, ask what it truly marks. Is it a founding or is it a renaming? When a name graces a dial, ask who was there before the name arrived. The visible world is always a summary, a compressed version of a much longer story. But the invisible world holds the full manuscript, and it is written in the movements, in the ledgers, in the documented claims of a house that still remembers its origin. You will stop reading dials as fixed texts and start reading them as palimpsests, layered surfaces beneath which older truths wait to be recovered. The reverso turns, and so does the story. That iconic case, born from a polo player's need to protect his crystal, is itself a symbol of hidden depth, a watch that can present its blank steel back to the world or reveal its intricate face. There is a poetic symmetry in that. The Jaeger-LeCoultre brand, like its most famous creation, has a side it shows and a side it protects. The polished dial is the public face. The history is the hidden back, always there, waiting to be flipped into view. The next time you handle a reverso, think of the inversion. The watch that hides its crystal is the brand that hides its founder, and both are waiting for you to turn them over. The second hand sweeps without a tremor, a quiet pact between craftsman and owner, a pact that has been renewed every second since 1833. In that sweep, you can now read the entire arc: the self-taught man in the barn, the first manufacture in the valley, the century of silent contribution, the meeting in 1903, the rename in 1937, the persistence of the older name in North America. The story is not a tragedy. It is a revelation. The maker was not erased. The maker was embedded, woven so deeply into the fabric of the industry that his name became the very architecture upon which others built their reputations. He lost the label but kept the legacy, and the legacy outlives every label, and the thread remains open. There are movements still in circulation that carry the LeCoultre signature unseen. Pieces of history that have not yet surfaced from drawers and safes, waiting for a discerning eye to recognize their true origin. The invisible world is infinite, and you have just learned to see one of its deepest layers. The crowd sees the hyphen. You now see the century before it. In the next exploration, we enter the atelier where even George Daniels, the master of the coaxial escapement, found the limits of what could be asked of a single material. Until then, remember the barn, the frozen valley, and the self-taught man whose name you will never again read without knowing the story behind it. When you lift that Jaeger-LeCoultre from its box, when your thumb finds the crown, and you feel the precise resistance of the winding. Let the weight of its history settle in your palm. You are holding 191 years of accumulated craft, a lineage that began in a converted barn and grew into the very definition of the manufacture. The dial may show the unified name, but your eye now carries the memory of the invisible one. And that changes everything. You are no longer just wearing a watch. You are wearing the proof that the deepest value in luxury is not the name displayed, but the story that the name conceals. That is the invisible world. And now, you see it.